Thanks for stopping by to check out this episode of Vintage Audio Review. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about this electrostatic sound systems, or ESS, stereo preamplifier. Now, I could not find a lot of information about it other than it was made around 1974, and in fact I found a review in a French stereo magazine dated 1974 along with its accompanying power amp. I also could not find any price information about it. There's just not a lot of information. I did find some basic specs on it, and I even printed out the French article and gave it to a student that was over here visiting to see if she could find any price information in it, and there was none. So I don't know how much it cost back in 1974. I do have a few of these specifications. It boasted a flatness with an auxiliary input of plus or minus 0.025 dB from 20 Hz to 20 kHz at not more than 0.0075% THD. And the phono stage was supposedly flat within 1/4 of a dB from 20 Hz to 20 kHz with the RIAA weighting applied. This came to me from a friend who was doing business with another guy, and this guy had it for 20 years, hadn't plugged it in, and he wanted me to check it out and do repairs on it. Once we get into the tour part, you'll see kind of what was going on with it. It basically worked okay. I ended up replacing 22 10 microfarad 25 volt axial capacitors, and then there were some power supply caps as well that were replaced. I think there was 4 or 5 of those. It really didn't make a lot of difference in the performance overall, but it's just something that I did for this guy, clean and lube the switches and controls, and you'll see how it works a little bit later on as far as the performance. It has several different features that are kind of nice for a preamplifier, and we'll go into those in our standard tour of the front, and you'll see what's going on around back, and then I'll pop the cover off and you can kind of see what it looks like inside, and I'll point out some of the things that I replaced. So that's kind of the basics of the video, and then of course there will be data that I measured on it, and finally I will tell you what it was like to use and what it sounded like. So sit back, grab some popcorn, a beer, coffee, whatever, and let's get on with the tour. Here is a more intimate view of the electrostatic sound systems, or ESS stereo preamplifier. Starting over here on the left, we have our input selector, and as you can see, there's 2 auxiliary inputs, a tuner input, an actual cassette input, which is separate from the monitor input, and a moving magnet phono input. We have a volume control here, a balance control here, treble and bass controls here. Now, these switches here, these push button switches, they're showing green now, and when they're not depressed, they are black. There's nothing showing. There is no green showing, and that is actually a mechanical action. It's not an LED or anything that's coming on. And we do have the ability to bypass the tone controls if we want. Right now they're in. We have high filter, low filter, a mono switch, and we do have our tape monitor switch here, 1/4" headphone jack. Then we have our ESS light here, and you'll see that it's a lamp that comes on. And then we have our on-off switch right here. Here is obviously the rear of the ESS stereo preamplifier. Starting on the left, we have 2 switched outlets, 2 unswitched outlets, a user replaceable fuse, and then we do have 2 sets of preamp outputs. That's very nice. We have our tape monitor loops here, and then you can see 2 auxiliary inputs, tuner input, a separate cassette input, or it could be a track, whatever you want, and then our phono input and a ground for the phono input. This is a view of the stereo preamplifier. Once you take the cover off, kind of just shows what's going on with everything. And as far as I can tell, it's all original. This is just a view of the preamplifier, and you can see that this capacitor right here has looks like it burned open, and you can also see a couple of cooked resistors here. Now, here is our lamp for the ESS display that I pointed out earlier. And indeed, I did replace these 2 resistors and this capacitor, although this capacitor, while it looks pretty ugly, it actually tested okay, both the leakage and its ESR.
but I did replace it. And this is just kind of a close-up showing the ugliness of the two resistors. And I'm not sure what caused those to go bad. I replaced them and they seem to work just fine after that. And this is just another view of the inside of this particular preamplifier. Right now, we're looking at our standard THD SNR plot with a 1 kilohertz 2 volt RMS signal going into the auxiliary 1 input. The volume control has been adjusted so that we've got about 0 dB of gain, and I did have to tweak the balance control a little bit to get these as close as possible. There is a spec for the THD, and it should be better than 0.0075%, and we're well better than that. SNR is right around 81, 82 dB, and it would be better if we didn't have the 180 and 60 hertz power supply hum bars, and that's even after the capacitors in the power supply have been replaced. I'm going to pull up what this guy originally looked like. So this is what the preamp looked like prior to the replacement of all the capacitors in the power supply, as well as all of the 10 microfarad 25 volt electrolytic caps that were used on this guy. And really the SNRs look about the same. THD looks about the same. The only difference is way down here you can see particularly the right channel. You see a lot of these little spurs here, I'm calling them, and those have gone away. Let me go ahead and get rid of this. So that's what it looks like now. And really the only difference was mainly on the right channel. You saw a lot of little spurs there, and they're gone now. But overall, it didn't change anything as far as THD or SNR. I still have a 2 volt RMS 1 kilohertz signal going into the auxiliary 1 input with the tone controls bypassed. And I've adjusted the volume control such that the gain is pretty close to 2 dB, which yields about 2.5 volts RMS output, which is the specification for this particular preamplifier. The max voltage out is supposed to be 2.5 volts out. And you can see our THD looks really, really good. The SNRs, according to the spec, should be 100 dB, and we're about we'll say 16, 17 dB away from that. But this is kind of what it's doing. And what I'm going to do is crank up the gain a bit to see how much gain I can actually get when I have a 2 volt RMS 1 kilohertz signal going in. And for those of you wondering what the harmonics are looking like under these conditions, you can see that our even or second harmonics, these guys here, are higher than the odd or third harmonics, which is typically what you see with tube gear, but not always. And sometimes with solid state gear, you will see that like we have going on here. I'm not able to get a lot more out of this guy. We went from about 2 dB of gain to between 3.3 to 4, depending on the channel. I could probably play with the balance a little bit, but you can start to see that some of the noise from the right channel is coming up, and some of these harmonics are getting worse here. And so we're at maybe 3 volts RMS, which probably is about the most that you're going to get out of this particular ESS preamp. Here is the 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz frequency response with a 1 volt RMS signal going into the auxiliary 1 input. The tone controls are being bypassed for this measurement. The only specification I came across was that over this frequency range, the flatness should be plus or minus 0.025 dB, and we're nowhere near that. But it's still not too bad. 20 hertz for the left channel, we're about 0.8 of a dB down, and for the right channel, only 0.2 of a dB. And by 100 hertz, it's pretty darn flat. So overall, the frequency response looks rather nice. I do have the bass and treble tone controls set to their detemp positions. So I'm going to go ahead and switch the tone controls on, even though they're in a detemp position. Usually we see some change in frequency response. So let's see what happens. Okay, so it looks like the left channel, it kind of improved a little bit. I guess maybe from 0.8 of a dB down at 20 hertz, we're about 0.4 of a dB up. It's fairly flat within 0.4 of a dB all around. And the right channel also, if it were moved up here, you'd see it's also within probably 0.3 of a dB. And overall, I would say the frequency response looks pretty good for the tone controls in the in position, but set flat. Here is the ESS Preamp's multitone response. There is no specification for it. It's kind of just here for comparison with other preamplifiers. Now this is for the case with the volume control set to give about 0 dB of gain, and it varies quite a bit. We have some little spurs here. I'm guessing those are related to the power supply, and that's going to drop the distortion free range to about 8 or 9 bits. But once we get up above that, we're probably in the 15 to 16 bits of distortion free range. Here is the ESS Preamp's IMD response with a 19 kilohertz and a 20 kilohertz tone applied. The volume controls are set for 0 dB of gain, and it looks really, really good. You're mainly looking for how big this 1 kilohertz signal is, and it's way down there in the mud. We don't have anything significant 1 kilohertz away from the 19 or 20 kilohertz tones. Those look also down in the mud. And then we have stuff out here at 38, 39 kilohertz that you wouldn't hear. So overall, I would say the IMD response looks pretty good. This stuff here is relating to the power supply, and that's not part of the IMD spec. Right now, I've got shorts on both of the auxiliary 2 inputs, which I've selected, and we're just looking at the system noise level of this ESS preamp. There is no specification for it. It just kind of shows that we're down about, we'll just call it minus 80 dBV, our noise level. Now, ideally, you would want it, down, way down here. That doesn't happen very much with preamps. I did hook up some headphones, and with the preamp set for 0 dB of gain, I didn't hear any hum at all coming through the headphones, but I can't really do a test other than that, because once you hook up to an amplifier, it's going to amplify this, and you may or may not hear it. This plot shows the input to input isolation. In this case, it's between auxiliary 1 and auxiliary 2 with a 0 dBV signal going to auxiliary 1, and then I switch over to auxiliary 2, which is terminated into shorts, and we see how much of that input signal is bleeding over to auxiliary 2, and it's really doing pretty good. I mean, this kind of stuff here is from the power supply hum, but overall it's better than, I'll say, maybe 90 dB, and right here at 20 kilohertz it's maybe 75 dB. So overall it has fairly decent isolation. There is no specification for it. It's just kind of here for your enjoyment. Here is the ESS's Crosstalk from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz with a 2 volt RMS signal going into the active channel and the volume control set for 0 dB of gain. There is no specification. It's kind of here just for comparison with other gear. At the high end of the band, our worst crosstalk is maybe 22, 23 dB. That's not very good. And once we get up above about a kilohertz, it's not bad at 52 dB, but it does drop off here quite a bit as the frequency increases, which is typically what you see, although usually I see readings that are better than 30 or in the upper 30s at 20 kilohertz. This plot shows the effect of the high and low filters. This thick blue line going pretty much down the center is with the tone controls active, but they're both set at their 0 detents for the most part, and then I switched in each of the filters. This green trace right here is our low filter, and we're down almost 5 dB at 20 hertz. Our high filter is the one in red, and we're down, about 12 dB at 20 kilohertz. Here is a plot showing the ESS Preamp's THD versus frequency for several different input signal levels, starting from minus 15 dBV all the way up to plus 6 dBV. And this is with the volume control set for 0 dB of gain. The specification is that the THD should be better than 0.0075%, which would be somewhere down here. So it basically is better than, we'll say, about 0.13% at the low part of the frequency band, and then it improves to better than 0.1% once you get to about, we'll say 100 hertz. So overall, it doesn't look too bad once you get up to the higher frequencies. Right now we're looking at the THD SNR response with a 1 kilohertz 10 millivolt signal applied to the phono input, and we're measuring this out the tape monitor output. I believe it's the record 1 output in this case. You can see our gains about 35 dB for the phono stage, SNRs 64 to 67 dB. THD's looking really good, we'll say better than 0.006%. And I should point out that I do have the RIAA weighting applied to this, otherwise it would kind of slope like that. The reason for the 10 millivolt signal is there is a specification that the noise should be down 80 dB with a 10 millivolt 1 kilohertz signal applied, and 0 here and 80 here. So we're meeting that specification, and this is really a 30 hertz power supply related noise. But overall, it's still meeting the specification that it had for the noise for the phono stage. This ugly looking plot is the frequency response from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz of the phono stage, and this is monitored at the tape record 1 output. And the specification says that it should be plus or minus a quarter dB across that frequency band with the RIAA weighting applied, which we have. We're more like plus or minus 2, maybe 3 dB here at the higher end of the band. So the channels are nicely balanced, but it is definitely not the smoothest frequency response that I have seen. Right now we're looking at the difference in phase between the input and the output, and this would be with the ESS preamp set for 0 dB of gain, and this is for a frequency of 1 kilohertz. There really is no difference in phase between the input and output signal. If we change the frequency to 10 kilohertz, we do have a slight difference in phase between the input and output signal, and that's about 3 degrees. If we move the frequency down to 100 hertz, we also have about 3 or 4 degrees of phase difference between the input and output signal. Now this trace here is showing the difference in phase between the left and right outputs, the main outputs from the preamp, and this is actually showing a difference in phase of about 15 degrees or so at 1 kilohertz. There is no specification for the rise time of this preamp, but it's looking pretty good. It looks to be about 60 nanoseconds.
One thing I wanted to demonstrate that may not have came out in the tour portion of the video are these little selectors here. When you depress them, they change green. It's a mechanical shutter kind of arrangement, and the Sherwood integrated amp that I did a review on a ways back, it also had that kind of a feature, and I think those turned either red or white when you press them in, but I thought that's kind of cool. As you saw from the test data, this particular ESS preamplifier, which I think had been worked on prior to me getting it. There was a sticker on the back, as you saw, from a service shop in San Francisco. So I think there were a lot of the signal capacitors that were replaced, and you could kind of see them in the ones I pointed out in there. I also replaced 2 resistors that were burned. They weren't fully open. They were 10 ohm resistors, and they were about 15 ohm, but you could tell they got really hot and they just fell apart when I went to pull them out. Now, the performance was not to its spec, especially the frequency response, which was pretty good. I think it was plus or minus half a dB from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz on the line level inputs. The phonograph was really bad. By that bad, I mean, plus or minus 2 dB, something like that, across the band with the RIAA weighting applied. Now, as far as its THD, it did meet that requirement. And overall, it wasn't bad. As far as its noise, it was right at the limit of the specification. So, it didn't have the best crosstalk. The input to input isolation wasn't too bad, but it's not nearly the best I've seen. And remember, this thing's, 50 years old, a little bit over that, and it does have a lot of the capacitors replaced in the power supply now. And the 10 microfarad 25 volt caps, there were about 22 of them, I believe, that were all replaced. They're axial caps, and I just replaced them all because they were showing a very high ESR. So I just went and replaced them. It made a little difference when you looked at the 1 kilohertz THD SNR plot, but not really that much. So other than that, I think it has a fair amount of features for a preamplifier, and you know, it's nice to have two line level outputs, and you know, it kind of had you know, two auxiliary inputs. That's kind of cool. So, you know, as far as a basic preamplifier, I thought, you know, it has a lot of nice features. For my listening test, I connected this to my Carver M400A power amplifier, which has 2930 dB of gain. And the amplifier was hooked up to the Wilson Mod 3 Puppy 2 loudspeakers, and I used my Hi-Fi Walker H20 DAP player as my source and listened to a bunch of music. And for the most part, I thought it did a fine job. I mean, I didn't want to A/B it against another preamplifier. I didn't really see any reason to do that. It sounded, you know, fine, I guess, as far as that goes. It did have a quirk. When you turned it on or off, you'd hear a bit of a squeal or a pop, both on and off, from capacitors charging up, I would imagine. And some other preamplifiers would have mute circuits, so you wouldn't hear that. It's reminiscent of a two power amplifier coming on where they make kind of funny sounds. A lot of them do, the older ones that don't have mute circuits on there to kind of limit that. But once that went away, and it was probably about 3 seconds, maybe 4 seconds, either on or off, it kind of did the same thing. You know, it sounded just fine, like I said earlier. Now, one thing with this preamp, as you saw on the test data, the most gain you could get before the distortion gets really bad is probably about 3 dB, and at that point you have maybe 3 volts out. So you want to be using this with a power amp that has probably, you know, close to 29 dB of gain. Although if you're not playing real loud, you know, most power amps are going to work fine with this preamp. But you know, that was one of my limitations that I saw potentially with it. As far as the controls, everything worked fine. The hum and hiss is kind of not really easy to do because it's going through the power amp, which amplifies this. So I heard just a small amount of hum when this thing was terminated into shorts, and I selected, I believe it was the auxiliary 2 input, and just listened for hum that wasn't from the amplifier. It's kind of hard to do, but I heard a little bit of a hum out of this guy. It's real small, and if you walk a few feet away, you wouldn't even hear it. But you know, that's kind of expected. Those hum bars were at minus 80 dB V down, so that's just probably the only negative thing, and I wouldn't really call it a negative because the amplifier that I used had a fair amount of gain, so it's probably not at all a problem for most listening purposes. But other than that, you know, if you came across one of these things, you know, and you thought maybe it would work for you, you know, it sounded just fine as far as I could tell, you know, other than that turn on or turn off squealing thump kind of a thing. But other than that, I thought it's a kind of a neat little preamplifier. So that's kind of my take on the ESS stereo preamplifier. I would love to see your comments, particularly if you knew how much one of these things cost back in 1974-75, and if you have any experience with them. Also, if you have not subscribed to the channel, I hope you will go ahead and subscribe to help the channel grow. And if you like the video, of course, the thumbs up always helps with the algorithms that YouTube uses to get your channel seen more. So once again, until next time, have a great day or night.